Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Daniel Kelly, and this is the final installment of our Careers in Athletics series for our Lunch and Learn series. And I'm joined today by one of my favorite colleagues from my days at Georgetown, Dr. Maya Ozery, who's the Executive Director of the Cooper Athletics Program at Georgetown University. In her role, she's responsible for the comprehensive leadership development training and education of 700 plus student athletes, coaches, and staff members. She serves as a sport administrator for men's soccer, men's tennis, women's tennis, and supports the overall management of these programs. Dr. Ozery, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This is a really good honor, and good seeing you again, always.
Of course, definitely really appreciate it. So to start off, I wanted to get more about your background. I know that you've been super active in college athletics, but just to give us a background about your role with Georgetown and overall in college athletics.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to anybody that's here right now and watching. You know, just your interest in college athletics is exciting to me. Anybody that's kind of curious about what this industry, what this environment looks like, you know, I'm excited to kind of help shape and maybe give you an idea of what I do. I've been in college athletics for 15 years, starting as a student athlete. So I was an international student athlete. I played soccer in college. I'm from Israel. I was actually on the Israeli national team for soccer, and then, you know, competed internationally, and then decided here for the opportunity really to be, you know, a student athlete, like to compete at the collegiate level was something that I was always really excited about. And women's soccer, you know, around the world, like the US is still the place to play soccer at, even though that's changing a little bit. But I was just really excited to come here. And I think when I think of my professional career, it really started with me being a student athlete and seeing many different opportunities, like seeing kind of this industry that I didn't even know existed. So I currently work at Georgetown University, but kind of getting here, I've had a couple different spots or stops at different universities. So I've really worked in this environment my whole professional career, and, you know, in a couple different roles. I started, you know, from kind of an academic advising role to now being one of our senior staff members at Georgetown. Actually, my first professional opportunity was being a graduate assistant, so a GA, at my alma mater, Barry University. And I think I'll talk a bit more about that a little later, where, you know, that's a Division II institution where there aren't a ton of staff members. So you end up learning a lot. Like you do a little bit of, well, I was doing a little bit of compliance, a little bit of life skills at the time, a little bit of academic, you know, helping out with driving a van, or, you know, cleaning, you know, something down, whatever it was. But that's kind of where I started in athletics. And then now currently, in addition to what Dr. Kelly, you know, mentioned in terms of my current role, you know, I do a lot of different things in terms of, one, leadership development. So that's kind of education and training and thinking about kind of strategically about how we create opportunities for students, coaches, and staff members. But that also includes, you know, connection with alumni and presenting to boards, you know, creating a strategic plan for like diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, conversation. I'm part of conversations around mental health and sports performance, like, you know, those type of things. And then in part of that, I also serve as an adjunct faculty member in our sport industry management program, and a consultant that really, I work with professional sport organizations and college athletic departments to think of kind of people and culture through a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging lens. So I do some of that work, you know, separately from what I do, but it's consistent with what I do here at Georgetown.
All right, great, thank you. And also to any of the students attending this session, if you'd like to submit questions, please use the Q&A feature, and I'll make sure to get to that during our Q&A at the end. So you mentioned about the pivots you've had to make with DEI as well as mental health. Can you give us some examples of some of the work you've had to explore now with all the changes due to COVID-19, as well as the implications on your role with Georgetown?
Absolutely. You know, I think when COVID-19 kind of hit campuses just in terms of the changes to the university shutting things down and what that meant for the athletic department. I think for me, as I kind of think of this last, more than a year, it's been 15, 16 months. I think the biggest pivot was kind of pausing and thinking, okay, I'm the executive director of a leadership program, and pausing and saying, okay, what is our role? Like, what is our purpose? What do I hope to achieve when there's so much uncertainty, when there's a lot of questions regarding what gatherings and community will look like. So I think the biggest pivot was just one, going, to the remote environment. But then also really thinking about what does a leadership program look like when our main kind of common denominator is playing sports, is our student athletes and our coaches competing at a really high level. And what does that then look like? What do the conversations look like? How do we create community amongst our student athletes, coaches, and staff members during a time where we're not together, during a time where there's a lot of uncertainty? And you mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion, and during a time where conversations related to racial justice specifically were at the forefront of all of our minds. So I think the biggest pivot for me, and just kind of thinking and challenge for me as someone who oversees a program, is saying, okay, what is our role? Like, if our role initially inherently was about helping people be the best that they can be, like in some, that's what I would say. How do we do that when they're spread around the country and the world, where, we don't know what, there's a lot of like, we don't know kind of, answers. And I think that's a one thing that I would think about, as I think of the last 15 months as the executive director. It's trying to give people a sense of direction and some certainty in terms of how we're going to keep together. And that's something that was really, really important to me.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I did want to ask you, you are creating development and training programs for 700 plus student athletes, coaches, staff members. How was the engagement, especially over the last 15, 16 months? I'm sure before that it was like pretty high because they were on campus, but then of course this past year, some are on campus, some are off, some seasons are active, some seasons were not. So how was the engagement?
Yeah, Dr. Kelly, that's a really good question. And I think that surprisingly really high. I actually think that when I look at the numbers and I see the feedback, so we get feedback after, significant programs, and we collect a lot of data to try and understand, okay, are we doing what we're trying to do? And that's a really key piece for our program. When I think of, this past year compared to years prior, I actually think the engagement was higher. Because I think that people were, and when I really reflect on it, and I'm still, this summertime is a time for me to kind of take kind of stock of what we've done and move forward to next year, where some of our programs will remain hybrid, where we will continue to use some of the technologies that we've used, because I think in some capacity, it actually kind of opened the door to doing some things where, students don't have to kind of be in the same space, but we can still engage at a certain level. But I would say the engagement among student athletes was, to me, the highest that I've ever seen. And I don't have the exact answer to why, but I speculate, and from things that I've heard students say is they were looking for purpose and looking to connect with people and still feel the community. Yeah. And one thing that we did is we said, okay, let's lean into that. Like, if student athletes are looking to still be connected with the athletic community and with their peers, let's create those spaces. So it became really about, creating those spaces and getting people involved. So rather than, an example that I could give you would be we do a women's leadership initiative. And in the past, we've partnered with ESPNW, and we've partnered with the Women's Sports Foundation, and done some really cool programs, like really fun programs to be involved with. Well, this year, because of what kind of I was noticing, what we did is actually create a women's leadership initiative committee. So it was a student athlete committee. So we had 15 students, and then we said, anybody that wants to be, involved in creating this program for student athletes can, apply. We had 15 student athletes that applied. They wanted to be part of this organizing committee, and then they put on a 3-day event, and it was incredible. And I would say, to me, and then we had more engagement even from student athletes who ended up attending the sessions. And the one thing that I noticed is, our student athletes are really capable, they're really bright, and they wanted to be involved in the process. And then for me, it was pivoting and shifting a bit and kind of creating those spaces, like giving them those opportunities to actually help us create opportunities for students to engage, asking them like, hey, what do women, so this specifically was for, targeted women. It's like, okay, what do you all want to talk about? Like, let's do this. And it's been really cool to see students respond to that in a positive way.
And I have to give it to you. I think you've been amazingly active with building partnerships. I mean, as you mentioned earlier with ESPNW and the Athletes for Hope, Institute for Sports and Social Justice, the Ross Initiative for Sports and Equality, for RISE. I think it's really fantastic that you've taken on that entrepreneurial spirit in this role. And I know it wasn't just because of COVID-19. I know it's kind of who you are to kind of build things. And so I think a lot of times students don't realize that in a role like this, you kind of have that purview to build. And so what kind of inspired you for these programs? I know you had the students who were interested, but a lot of it had to come from your past partnerships on your network. And so how were you able to kind of build this type of portfolio?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of my strengths, and I think one of my top 5 strengths in Gallup, the Strengths Finder, if anybody's ever taken that.
Of course, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so I won't put you on the spot and ask you your top 5, but one of my top 5, one of my top one is being and just always being curious and wanting to learn more about people, about environments, about the situation. And one of the other top, I don't know in what order, is being a collaborator. And really leaning into or leaning on my own strengths to then try and identify the appropriate partner. Because I'll tell you one thing, and this is for everybody here, like we have people every day. I have people, maybe not every day, but like very frequently I have people reaching out to us, whether it's individuals, organizations, or companies that reach out and say, hey, we want to partner with you all, and this is what we can do for you, or this is what we're hoping for. And I think in my role, one of the things I've thought about is like trying to find kind of a win-win situation. So situations that would be a big win for our student athletes and our department. And then also with the right partner, someone that has maybe similar values. Like at Georgetown, like we're anchored in our core values as an institution and also as an athletic department. So if we can partner with organizations that could provide us some expertise and complement what we're doing, in addition to, aligning with what we're trying to do, it's just a big win-win. It's more than just like 1 and 1 + 1 = 2. Like it ends up being, really spectacular. So yeah, I think I view myself a little bit like an entrepreneur. I know it doesn't sound, but I'm like, I have a PhD and I work in, college athletics, but I think I view myself a little bit as like, okay, like let's try and think about this differently. Adam Grant just wrote a book and it's called, I just forgot the name, but it's called Think Again. And it's about like, hey, how do he's an organizational psychologist, and the whole book is about, like thinking about ideas that maybe we already think about, but maybe thinking about them differently. Like, so that's a little bit how I think about, my role and our leadership program and engagement with students.
Okay. And so how do you balance your calendar? Because you have 750 high level athletes on Georgetown's Division I campus. You have top level staffers, top level, partners and coaches. And you've been super busy launching the Student Athlete Leadership Institute, the Coaches Summit, and the Coaches Leadership Institute. I mean, you are balancing a lot, building partnerships off campus. And so how do you balance out your schedule? How was a typical day for you? And so those students can see what you do in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this. I mean, admittedly, some days I balance my schedule better than other days, and some weeks are better than other weeks. I think, for anybody that's interested in college athletics, I think one thing is to recognize that there's kind of the formal things that you're going to do, and then there's some things that you do because part of to me, like part of doing the work. So for example, a leadership program, part of me doing that well is people knowing who I am, like getting to know people and for people to get to know me. And to do that, it takes time. Like it takes you going to people's offices and checking in with folks, and not just, talking to people when you need something, but it's
Yeah.
actually getting to know people and developing, relationships, like real human relationships. And I think that's been hard over COVID, but a normal day for me is, I'm definitely part of specific meetings, whether it's through, our senior leadership team within the athletic department. I'm on a couple committees with the university. So sometimes, I might be part of a committee within the university. I have a couple interns that work with me. So we'll have, daily or weekly check-ins just to see where we're at with a couple with projects and work that we're working on. And then usually I carve out some time for either learning time. So time where I can like think, just take a moment and like think deeply about what we're doing and be really strategic about that. Or a time where I'm actually developing curriculum or developing, different, components of a program that we're doing. So the Leadership Institute is an example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a mix of that. And I would say in a normal year, it's going out to practice and like just, being out there at practice and, seeing people, and for students to see me, and for folks to know that I'm here, in this role, but I'm really here to support them in their endeavors. So I think in athletics, and to me, that's a really fun thing. Like, I think you have to love sports to work in this environment, and being able to just, my office is, not too far from our football field, players, it's popping out and watching a little bit of a practice, when I can, and being in touch. Yeah. I don't know if that helps, but
No,
anybody feel
that's
free to ask me questions about kind of what my day looks like.
No, that's very, very helpful. I want to take a bit of a pivot at this time to kind of your background. And so you mentioned earlier
Sure.
about your past experiences with the Israeli national soccer team, and then of course your time at Barry University as a student athlete, and then your work with the NCAA in leadership development. How was that experience going through those programmings and those kind of camps and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. What's amazing is, as a student athlete, I had an opportunity to be part of, I was nominated and selected to be part of the NCAA Leadership Forum. And it's a program
Yes.
that's been going on for about 20 years or so. And now as a professional, I then had the opportunity to be a facilitator. So I've selected for that, to be a facilitator and help lead. And now I actually am writing the curriculum for it. So I'm one of the lead facilitators that oversees it and trains the facilitators. And when I think about opportunities, one, I have to say, like, I've been really blessed to be around really good people and people who have supported me and helped me. And I think that's really important. So anybody that's, as you're trying to figure out your professional path and journey, like really thinking about people who are around you, who you can learn from, who you can lean on, when you're trying to figure, your own path out. With the NCA, so the work is amazing. I think the opportunity to impact folks around the country and to develop a path for people to kind of figure out their own purpose and passions, and to connect with really good people from a Division 1, 2, and 3 has been really special. And I feel really fortunate that I get to do that specific program. So the NCA, I've done a couple of different programs with them, but the two main ones have been the NCA Leadership Forum, which is a national kind of program that the NCA brings together about 400 student athletes and coaches and staff from all divisions, from all around the country together. And they go through like a 3-day kind of conference that focuses on leadership. And I've been able to, help with designing that, or, be one of the people that designs that. And then the Leadership Academy workshop, which is a program where we actually teach people and guide people into how to build a leadership program on their campus. So that's a really fun, I think that both those programs and the other work that I do, it's really fulfilling work. It kind of fills your cup, like helping people figure out how to do things on their own campus with their own resources has been really neat.
All right, great. The good part is that we have quite a few former student athletes on our campus who are interested in pursuing, doctoral studies or continuing on with this type of work. Do you have any best practices for working with student athletes, especially balancing, their busy schedules with, extracurricular leadership training, et cetera?
Yeah. There's a couple things I think about as you ask that question. One would be, and I mentioned the example of the Women's Leadership Initiative, and I think the one would be involving student athletes to be part of the process and the solution, to me, as much as we can. And I think our student athletes are showing that they want to, share their voice. They want to be part of the process. So the example that I shared, rather than us just creating something for the students and the student receiving an invitation, it's actually involving students in the process, and then students supporting students and creating as much as we can, creating kind of peer-to-peer connections. I mean, there's a lot of research and literature that shows that mentorship and peer-to-peer interactions really support students' growth. So thinking about that strategically, like thinking of, okay, how can we involve student athletes to be part of the solution? I think that would be one thing. I think too, understanding that students, student athletes are coming like students on campus, but specifically, with the identity of being a student athletes are coming in at different points in their own journey. Like some folks are like, I have people, Dr. Kelly, I'm sure you do too, like we have students before they're even on campus, they'll email me and say, hey, Dr. Ozery, like I want to get involved. What can I do? Leadership development sounds cool. How do I get involved? And then we have students, that they're going into their senior year and they say, hey, like I've seen the emails. I think there's some cool things that I could get involved with. Yeah. I know that I've been part of some programs, but how can I take advantage of the resources and benefits? So I think at those points, it's understanding that like I'm here and we're all here to support students wherever they are in their journey. College is it's a journey of self-discovery. That's the way I think about it. So like understanding that people are figuring out their identities, like people are figuring out, man, the conversations we were having, this past year that were just very, like so real about what it means to be an ally, like what it means to be a Black student at a predominantly white institution, what it means to be an athlete of first race or ethnicity or religion. And, so I think understanding, like coming in with the understanding that people are different and people are coming in at different points in their own journey and trying to kind of meet them where they're at. That would be my best practice, like trying to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I know it's not easy. As you mentioned, some students are more proactive. They're reaching out to you the summer before they even start at Georgetown. And then some are senior year, you're right. Some even graduating as alums and reaching back. So
yes, we definitely have those students who say, hey, I graduated, I've seen you a bunch, but can we talk?
Yeah. And they're always surprised, and they always say, I wish somebody had told me you did this when I was there. And of course, they got the emails. Yeah. Quick question, though. Somebody from one of my students, Vaughn Willis. Great question. What does the future look like with the Supreme Court's ruling on college athletes getting paid? Of course, that's a reference to name, image, and likeness with NIL. And that's going to impact your job quite a bit as well. So any thoughts?
Yeah, Vaughn, thank you for the question. I think that's it's a really big question in terms of what does the future look like. And I think that, if you all want real talk about college athletics, like we're trying to figure it out, right? Like it's not as though like at Georgetown athletics, like we're sitting here knowing what's going to come through in terms of the ruling, from a federal standpoint or from a university or the NCAA, like we don't know either. So we're trying to figure out, okay, well, if things go through the way that we anticipate, if changes happen the way we think they're going to happen, how do we then support our student athletes in the ways that maybe we need to support them? So I think the changes are imminent. And I think one thing, one piece of advice for me, anybody that's interested in college athletics, is learning about the history of college athletics, like learning about the history, like where, why was the NCAA even formed? Like, what is the governance structure? Why, do we have the conference structure that we have, the conference realignment, like just the different components of college athletics. And I think the context to that, like understanding where we've come from in terms of college athletics, can really help us as we understand that changes need to happen, right? So understanding that changes have happened over, the last 100 years of intercollegiate athletics in the United States, and then understanding that changes will happen moving forward. And what that looks like, I'm not sure I know what that looks like, but what it looks like is it seems like more of a, a free market, open market in terms of student athletes having access to benefiting from their name, image, and likeness. There was the Alston case that just happened, just came through this week, that I think is giving people the sense that name, image, likeness is going to, move forward as we have thought that it's going to move forward. But I think there's a lot of questions in terms of what type of support are student athletes going to need once things change, right? Like once the things are more open for them, what does that look like? To your point, Dr. Kelly, like what does that look like then in terms of maybe the support or education that athletic departments are going to be, asked to provide student athletes? Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Vaughn, but happy to talk about that more, but that's a big question.
It's a very big question. And I think that's something that we've had many conversations about here as well, especially being located in NYU. And I can only imagine at Georgetown having a lot of Division I athletes who will be able to benefit from that. So a quick question, pivoting back to your background again. You have very extensive experiences, the academic credentials. In your role, was there a need to get a separate license to be to be in your role that you're currently in right now, or did you just need the PhD?
Yeah, I don't think that there was a need for additional certification. I also don't know, specifically if our athletic director or university itself, if they were looking for someone with a doctorate for this role. The person though before me did have a doctorate, you know him. Dr. Mike Lorenzen, and he's at UC Davis right now. He did have a doctorate. I think that, so I would say in general, no. For my specific role, I think in an institution like Georgetown, it probably helps. It helps me, be in meetings with faculty members and staff members who are educated and, well-versed in different topics. And I think, that background definitely supports me in my role. Like my, knowledge and the fact that I got, wrote my dissertation about leadership in college athletics definitely helps me in the work that I do. So absolutely, someone could be really, have expertise around leadership development and it just in our space without a doctorate. But I think that in my environment, I've just found that it's helpful for me when I walk into the room, as I have those type of conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think especially at a place like Georgetown, it's a game changer. It's so faculty led. So I've been in your shoes. Yeah, the PhD does open the doors for you. But overall, in the industry, especially navigating student athletes, major college athletics, I think you mentioned earlier about mental health, and so I want to take a deeper dive into mental health. And I've been impressed with the resources that are available at NYU, and I've seen the resources, of course, at Georgetown. When it comes to balancing your duties and leadership development, and a lot of times mental health is going to be a big issue, especially with the limitations and restrictions from COVID-19.
Right. Has
anything surprised you over the past 15 months with mental health and anything that came on your radar?
Yeah. I think this might be the number one, and I'm not even ranking them, but this might be the number one concern that we had over, the last 15 months when you mentioned, so just the situation at Georgetown was that some of our student athletes were back on campus and competing, and some student athletes were not. Many student athletes, like students, ended up coming back to DC and living in the area, but we didn't have the same, they didn't have access to us and we didn't have access to supporting them in the same way because of, access to campus and restrictions and whatnot. And I think the conversations around mental health are probably the number one concern that we have. Like, how do we support students in the ways that we need with a growing need, right? So like understanding that in the last, you said 15 months and beyond that, the need for student support just on campus has grown. And there's a lot of numbers to kind of back that up. And then in the athletic department, how do we manage that and support students? Understanding also there that there's kind of, a range of needs. So some people need ongoing clinical support, and some students need more kind of situational support and someone to talk to and whatnot. So we're really fortunate that we have a sports psychologist. So she's amazing and really, really good at what she does, embedded in the athletic department. And that was, we were able to receive a gift. So that means fundraise dollars just for everybody. That was through a gift. That we had really generous donors that helped us put that together. And, and I think that's still the concern for us. One thing our AD, our athletic director, Lee Reed, talks about is the Georgetown athletics is student athlete centered, coach driven, and administrator assisted. So when you ask me, like in my role, how do I, what is the relationship just with kind of this idea or the needs around mental health is I'm always reminded that the student athletes are at the center of everything that we do. And that the coach, kind of drives the boat with his or her team, but I'm here to support and assist them in whatever, way we need to. So I definitely think the mental health concern has increased. I think not being together, it's well documented that this year has been very challenging for students just in general. And I think for student athletes, part of what I'm seeing are just specifically just with students I work with, are differences then based on socioeconomic status, on, resources that they have at home, on location, like where people were at during, the pandemic in terms of states, right? Like people experience this very differently, based on race and ethnicity, based on, there were many different identities that kind of came into play in terms of how people were being, how COVID-19 impacted folks. And that's far and beyond college athletics, right? But for us, it shows up in a way when we're working with our student athletes. Yeah, I hope that I'm not sure. That might be a convoluted way of answering your question, but it's definitely like top of mind.
No, I think the biggest thing was the resources, and I had no idea about the private gift leading into that as well. That's a very fortunate opportunity to be able to fund it, to have an in-house sports psychologist, in addition to what you do as well. I do want to get back into your background again. I think the students are going to really be able to resonate with you because of how your background is so amazing. So during your development, you're trying to figure out a career that you may be interested in. How did you know this type of role would be a good fit for you?
Yeah, you know what, so folks ask me sometimes, like if this is, if I kind of like how I got to this point. And I think sometimes like, I don't know if I ever knew, and I still don't know like what the title of like my dream job would be. And maybe I should, I don't know. I don't know if you do, Dr. Kelly. This might be very close what you're doing, because you're doing amazing. Right, yeah, I was going to say, because you're doing amazing things at an amazing university. Right. But I think when I graduated my master's degree, so my master's degree was in sport and exercise psychology. And I thought that, I would be kind of a sports psychologist, and ended up realizing that that wasn't necessarily the track that I wanted to go through. But what I really leaned on was thinking about like, what am I really good at? Like, what are my strengths? And then kind of like, what does the world need? Like, what are job opportunities? And then, and really thinking about like, what does that look like? Like, what are my strengths and where do I thrive? What are the environments that work well for me? And what are my passions? Like, what could I really enjoy doing on an ongoing basis? And what I realized is it wasn't a specific like job title. And there are many in college athletics. Like if you guys Google this, there's a lot of different job titles. But I think what I realized was I wanted to work in kind of the sports environment, and I wanted to work with people in a supportive way. And the first opportunity I had was as a GA at Barry University, my alma mater. And I did a little bit of everything. At that point, I realized I didn't want to do compliance. Like I was like, all these rules, like this is not exactly for me. But I really like, I go back and think about that time because it taught me so much about just how college athletics works. And my first full-time position was actually as an academic advisor. And in that role, I got to interact with students on a daily basis. I got to interact with coaches. I got to help people, like, even if it was just class selection or managing a relationship with their faculty member. It was a lot of one-on-one and small groups. at that point in my first full-time job, like I got in front of, 100, 200 students and had to
Yeah.
speak, which gave me experiences that now when I'm in front of 1,000 people, like I can do that a bit more confidently, or
Yeah.
with more confidence. So I think, I started there, I then moved up. So I think one thing for anybody watching this is I started my first full-time position was at Longwood University, small Division 1, Central Virginia, Farmville, Virginia. I actually met so initially, like I thought, okay, I'll be here a year or two, and you end up, things happen. So I ended up being able to take on a few more kind of responsibilities because we were a small athletic department, gain a lot of different experiences, get involved in really, interesting conversations to me, get involved with campus, which I felt was really important. But I also personally like met my partner there, and I could have never imagined that like I'd go to Farmville, Virginia and meet a Canadian who I would click with. And now we're, like 10 years later, still together. And I think, when you think of your career path, I think for me, it's been just following, okay, what is the impact I'm trying to have? And what are the professional opportunities that exist? So from Longwood, I ended up being an assistant athletic director at Longwood, starting as an academic advisor, 5 years later being an assistant AD. And then I moved to Richmond, where I started a leadership program there, and then had the opportunity to come to Georgetown. So it's been interesting, like just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, you've really gone like different levels, and then have been
Hmm.
able to really build and from scratch an entire program at Richmond, and then of course take over a program that was established, but also bring in your own partnerships. And so, a big time trajectory with your career path. So congratulations to you. You've done a lot of great work at
Hmm.
Georgetown, Richmond, and Longwood as well. I think my final
Yeah,
question
thank you.
is going to be on pivots after COVID-19. So I think, for me
Mm,
personally, we have learned so much,
yeah.
especially with the limitations and restrictions and just trying to be more active with our engagement with our students. And so I'm sure you have dealt with that as well. Are there any best practices that you have picked up over the past year that you're going to keep as we possibly return to campus this fall?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one best practice is even in context, like we're hoping that, the fall is going to be as normal as it can be, meaning we're competing and we're on campus and our student athletes are competing and doing what they love and thriving and all of that good stuff. I think from a development standpoint, one of the things that I'm going to hold on to is just this idea that there is value in continuing to use technology. So while we were forced to use technology and like very quickly adjust to being in a remote environment, there's a lot that we can learn from this experience. Like I became, a mini Zoom expert. I don't know if you feel this too, Dr. Kelly.
Of course.
But like I've learned myself, I've learned a lot of skills, and I had to see the value in doing things differently. And I think with some elements of our program, we're going to hold on to using technology because much of the conversation around college athletics with student athletes is managing their time, right? Time management, like the required time that the time that that student athletes are required to be involved in, athletic related activities. And for me, if we have the opportunity to be flexible with certain components, there are some components that we can't wait to be all together in one space. But I think best practices is to say, okay, what can we learn from this last year and take it over and really use and leverage going into next year. So for me, one of them is using technology and continuing to use some hybrid models. And I would say that, I could give some examples with that, but that would be one thing. Two is I think, inherently student athletes wanted to be connected. Like they were eager to be connected to their athletic identity. And I anticipate it's because of that was the one thing that, for many of them, they weren't able to express, right? You were still a student, you were still, a son or a daughter or whatnot, like while COVID-19 was happening. But many of our students, didn't compete for a year, so, or maybe more. So I think recognizing the many different identities that our student athletes have, and one of them being an athlete, like being a competitive athlete. So I think for us, it's like leaning into to that as well, to thinking about, okay, well, how can we help student athletes thrive and really consider what their identity as an athlete means, where maybe before, like, some students were kind of going through the motions, and I think if anything, like, I'm hearing students say, hey, like, I have such a greater appreciation for the opportunities I have, right? Like, or I can't wait to come back and be in the locker room, like those moments that maybe I took for granted, like chatting with my teammate in the locker room. I can't wait to just be at that moment, or, just on the deck outside the pool, like those type of things, not just
Yeah.
competition. Yeah, those are the
No,
two
you're,
things
you're
I'm
you're
thinking
right.
about.
Yeah, you're definitely right. It's the little things that they probably took for granted that they now appreciate. And I think you're going to see a lot of growth when they return to campus, a lot of growth and maturation, a lot of, this could be the last time we compete at this level, and taking everything for granted before, and making sure not to do that again. And so I think it's going to be exciting this fall when we return. It'll be, there'll be students in the classroom. There'll be also athletes as well. And I think overall it's going to be really exciting for college athletics, period. And so
Yeah, I agree.
I guess the last piece would be, do you have any advice for aspiring practitioners who may want to enter into college athletics or enter into leadership development? Just some last tips or pieces of advice that you would offer them.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I would say is not being fixated on kind of a title and a specific role, like really trying to figure out, like, in what environments are you your best self? And then what are the areas of need? So if I'm my best self in an area that is not a need, that might be a passion, it might not be a professional career path. So thinking about, where do you thrive? Like, in what environments, like, do you show up and you're your best self? So those are some things that I ask myself, and I continue to ask myself. And I continue to ask myself because you grow and you develop, right? So who I am and how I do things now, while my values, I have a core values that haven't really changed. Like, I have grown in the last 15 years, right? When I came in as someone who didn't really know this environment, and now I know it significantly better. So I think then, and being okay with kind of figuring it out. And the other thing, so one would be that, and two would be like being curious, like wanting to learn and understand the industry and understand the many different facets of this industry. I think the one thing that when I work with students, graduate students and undergrads, I think the perspective on college athletics, like not as a fan and not as a former student athlete, but as a professional that wants to work in this environment, that's a different hat. And that hat requires you to say, okay, why do we do things the way we do things, and how do we make this better? That's different from being a fan and criticizing, or being a student athlete and experiencing it through that lens. So I think gaining, a real understanding of the different facets of college athletics. And the example I'll just give, I didn't understand as a student athlete the intricacy of the relationship with, internally. So with university leadership, with faculty members, with student affairs, with student athletes and their parents, internally with staff members, right? So you have turnover with staff members. I've worked at private and, state institutions. So there's the state, or, if it's private, it's a lot of fundraising and alumni engagement.
Yeah.
And then externally, alumni, state, or government institutions. And then, you think of fans and folks that buy tickets or sponsor. So like, just having that understanding and being curious and asking questions, I think is really important. Like, not having too many preconceived notions about what this is, I think is helpful. I think helpful to, again, think about things differently.
Well, Dr. Ozery, we really appreciate it. This was a fantastic dive into your role and also your work with student athletes, and it's phenomenal. And I want to thank you today for joining us. We really appreciate it. And to everyone else out there joining us, thank you for joining us today. It was a fantastic way to end the 2021 academic term as we move forward to the fall semester. I look forward to you joining us for new programs in the fall. All right, take care.
Thank you, everyone.